My grandfather was a kind and gentle man. I wish you all had known him. His hands were twisted and warped, often broken, and rarely tended by modern medicine. My grandfather's pinky fingers would stick out disobediently, and the tips of his fingers sometimes bent in unusual ways. His hands were so beautiful. His hands tell a story of my family, of life, and of generational trauma. I had a mentor who used to say to me, "Tell your story. If you don't, someone else will." And my grandfather's story is my story. My grandfather was black. Let this be a gentle content warning. My message today contains stories of racialized violence and poverty. Friends, I believe that people, human beings, all of us, are not made of flesh and blood. Rather, we are made of stories. The stories we tell about ourselves, about our ancestry, about our past, about our world, make us who we are. Stories shape our personalities and therefore our futures. If we do not tell our own stories, others will tell our stories for us. This is good news because stories are woven into our identities, histories, even our imaginations. We are made of stories. My grandfather was born in rural Mississippi in 1938 or 1939. One of 4 boys, they lived in a 1-bedroom shack with dirt floors. His parents slept in the only bed in the house, and the children all slept on top of the furniture in the living room. You see, in the dirt floors, the rats would come in, and if they weren't on the furniture, they would nibble at their toes. My great-grandmother heard one day through the grapevine that her son, the eldest, was accused of saying something to a white woman. In her time and place, this alone was akin to a death sentence, not just for the eldest, but for any or every black child who might have gotten caught in the blowback. That night, my grandfather's parents packed the bags of all of the children under cover of darkness and sent them north to Waterloo, Iowa, where black folks had found refuge in a John Deere factory. When they got to Waterloo, John Deere wasn't hiring anymore. So instead, they found work in the local meat packing plant. In time, my grandfather was able to enroll in the local high school. There, he found out he was really good at football. I mean, really good. When he graduated from high school, he was offered a full scholarship to play for the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. His first career was to play football, and he went from there to the Dallas Cowboys. But before that, he went back to Waterloo, Iowa, where he rescued my grandmother from her abusive home. She was at the time only 17 years old, and they lied about her age to get married and start a family in Albuquerque. At the Dallas Cowboys, he played for 10 years. He lived in Albuquerque and commuted to Dallas, and there was inducted into the Ring of Honor. After retiring from football, my grandfather became a sportscaster, offering color commentary on the game and insights over national television. This career lasted several years before his restless spirit sent him on the road, driving an 18-wheeler across the country. If you're keeping track, that's his 3rd career now. You see, my grandfather was an avid reader and a profound social critic. And after a few years touring the country, seeing the country, he returned to Albuquerque with a new calling in the Albuquerque Police Department. Because of his status as a public figure, my grandfather was given authority early on, and his zeal and concern for racialized issues put him in charge of the National Program Against Gang Violence, GREAT, if you remember from the 90s, and DARE, which was Drug Awareness, Resistance, and Training. I would tell you so much more about all of these careers and the impact they left on me, but I'm told I only have 12 minutes and I can only tell you so many stories. After he retired from the police force, my grandfather dedicated his life to acting. He performed Chautauquas, one-man plays in the character of Frederick Douglass, touring the public library system in the state of New Mexico and around the country, introducing people to the great abolitionist in costume. And for those still counting, that's 5 careers. I had seen video footage of my grandfather's football games, old clips of him on ESPN. I visited him as a young child at his office in the police department and learned to use his name as often as I could if I was ever stopped by another police officer. But the grandfather that I knew best used to come to our local public library and to libraries around the country, dressed in old clothes, teaching us about slavery and abolition in unbroken character as Frederick Douglass. He would walk out on stage slowly, his bent and twisting hands evoking the cotton-worn fingers of a time and place many of us would rather forget. Friends, the past is never dead. It's not even past. In our opening words today, Faulkner reminds us, all of us, that we are contained by webs spun long before we were born, webs of heredity and environment, of desire and consequence, history and eternity. You see, my grandfather never slept much. As long as I knew him, whatever hour of the day or night I arrived at his house, he was awake. As I got older, I would often stay at my grandfather's house because he lived closer to my school. He was up long after I went to bed and was always up before I awoke. As I got older, I began to notice that my mother, his oldest daughter, also didn't sleep much. You know, neither did my uncles. In fact, all of my grandfather's children struggled to sleep. And you know, I myself don't sleep that much. I often get to bed around midnight, but by 4:30 or so in the morning, I'm ready to go. It's always been that way for me, and for a number of my cousins as well. You see, some of you may have heard of this thing called epigenetics. Epigenetics describes the way behavior and environment can cause changes to the way your genes are expressed. Now, to be clear, it doesn't change your genetics, but the hormone cortisol released during stress, and especially in extreme stress, can change how our body responds to stress itself, even change how our body responds to DNA. Cortisol can bind to your DNA. The effects of cortisol can be passed on like genetics. Unlike genetic mutations, epigenetics changes can be reversed. This means 2 important things for us today. The first, whatever happens to you and what happened to your parents and what happened to your grandparents can change your body today without your knowledge. It can change the way your body responds to stress. Secondly, it means that this process can be reversed. Now, no doubt some of you will be interested in the science, and there are plenty of places to read about it, but if you are a skeptic, I encourage you in particular to consider a study entitled Epigenetic Modifications in Stress Response Genes Associated with Childhood Trauma. This is by authors Xu Jiang, Lynn Postovit, Ana Maria Cataneo, Elizabeth Binder, and Catherine Aitchison. It was produced in 2019, and in this study, the authors demonstrate how and why adverse childhood experiences can have a lifelong impact on our mental and physical health. Friends, we are not made of flesh and blood. We are made of stories. The stories we tell about ourselves live on in our epigenetics, stories about our ancestry, about our past, about our world. These stories shape our personalities, and this is good news, because stories are woven into our identities, our histories, our imaginations. You see, it was many years of conversation before I got a phone call from my mother when my grandfather passed away in June of 2022. You see, she had begun to notice this trend of us not sleeping. She traced this behavior back to the one-room shack in Mississippi where my grandfather slept on top of this chest of drawers. It's perhaps only common sense in retrospect to see the traumatic context and circumstance would have been enough to teach my grandfather's body that sleep was never safe. Sleep should only be engaged sparingly. My grandfather's body then could have taught the bodies of my mother and of my uncles and of us, his grandchildren, the same, wordlessly. Friends, tell your stories, because if you don't, someone else will. In this country, the trauma of poverty, of marginalization, of isolation, but particularly the trauma of racialized oppression lives in all of our bodies in different ways. These traumas of racism, poverty, and various forms of bigotry can be passed on from generation to generation. What did your body learn from your parents, from your grandparents, from generations past? In this country, my grandfather was not perfect, as if any of us are. My grandfather had a warmth, that is true, but it was often not visible from the outside. My grandfather loved with reckless abandon, but he rarely smiled. It was as if he was never quite able to relax. I don't come to you today venerating my grandfather as a hero, and I'm not encouraging you all to lift your ancestors up as heroes on pedestals to be admired either. But today I am asking you to consider your past and your story, and consider the possibility that you learned something more than what you were taught, more than you think you remember. The past is never dead. In fact, it isn't even past. My grandfather's hands told a story as well. His hands were made strong and calloused by his work, first as a child of sharecroppers in Mississippi, then as a laborer in meatpacking plants. My father's hands were twisted through overwork as he pulled double duty attending school and working for wages. Through college and professional football, my grandfather's hands took a beating, grabbed, pulled, and ripped at by other athletes. And for years, my grandfather's hands only had one purpose: hold on to the football. Don't drop it under any circumstances. And doing that job, his hands were severely abused. And now, 2 generations later, friends, my fingers twist inward, if you can see that. You can see how my pinky fingers don't quite obey when I pull them in. Growing up, I was told all my life that hopefully I would inherit my grandfather's athleticism, his strength, his fortitude, that my grandfather must have had a genetic advantage to be so good, and that he could pass those genetics on to me. Well, nobody told me that instead I would inherit his sleep habits, his twisted hands. Over the past few weeks, I have spent time at an immigration center here in New Jersey, just across the river, Delaney Hall. You may all have heard what is happening over there. In the industrial swampland of Newark, ICE has been illegally detaining thousands of people in deplorable and torturous conditions, and inside, detainees have been performing a labor and hunger strike, with protesters and clergy supporting this act of witness in protest outside the facility. If you haven't been, I encourage you to go, but with a single caveat: bring your story with you. Hold your story while you are present, because the story of what's happening at Delaney Hall impacts us and is connected to our past, our stories of immigration, our stories of our ancestors, how they got here, and what they found when they did. We, who want to support human life and who want to oppose fascism and cruel and unusual punishment, instead sometimes get pulled back into those stories. Ask yourself first, what is your story of immigration? Because, friends, if you don't tell your own story, someone else will. The stories of your ancestors are your story because what happened to them lives in you. It lives in our bodies. We have a responsibility to tell these stories. The story that our culture tells us of the world that says we are all the same, that the past is the past, and that we can leave it behind. It cannot hurt us. this is not my story. In my story, the hurt and suffering my ancestors endured still very much applies to me. But friends, this is good news because we can learn our stories. We can learn what happened to us. We can learn what happened to our parents, our grandparents. We can learn about our communities and how we came to be who we are today. What are your stories, friends? How did you end up here? Who are your ancestors? It is never too late to consider who you are. My message today is simple. I believe that human beings are not made of flesh and blood. We are made of stories. The stories we tell ourselves about the world make us who we are. If we do not tell our own stories, someone else will. Amen. Ashe. Masakan.